All right, in my list of favorite players from any given team and their franchises, I'm going with the Islanders today. And yeah, this is in a random order. I enjoy doing this in random order, and we'll get through all the teams because I think it's important. Like I did obviously my favorite teams first, and then I went, nah, I'm gonna go random from there. That way, it's not he's saving us for last because he can't stand us. He did that team because they're his favorites. So Islanders, again, I've had to kind of include one or two players that were included in other favorites lists because they may have been iconic members of the Islanders or key members of the Islanders. One omission is John Tavares. John Tavares, honestly, I don't know if he would have been in my top 15 favorite Islanders before he walked out in the Islanders, but I felt like, I can't have him in the top 15. I can't. I can't look at his career right now and say that he would have been one of my favorite Islanders. And I don't know, again, I don't know if he would have been if I had done this video before he left. I don't know. All I know is the difference is if I had done this video 3 years ago and not had Tavares in my top 15, Islander fans would have been enraged. And now if I had him in the top 15, Islander fans would probably be enraged as well. I want to give an honorable mention to Pat Flatley, who doesn't make it, but Pat Flatley belongs in this discussion. And Chico Resch on some level. When I started watching hockey, Resch was in the process of going to the Colorado Rockies. So I didn't really see Resch as a member of the Islanders, but I like Glenn Resch quite a bit. So he likely would have been top 15 if I had watched hockey sooner. And that's the rule here. I have to have watched these guys play. If I didn't watch them play, how can they be a favorite? That's just to me, that's how it has to work. Number 15 on the overall list. Josh Bailey was a first-round draft pick who never quite reached the expectation when he was drafted where he was, but he has evolved into a pretty darn solid top 6 player, and he did eventually get to a level similar to where he was expected to get. And so for that reason, I have respect for Bailey. He's been an Islander for a long time. He's likely going to be an Islander for some time to come. I've just jinxed him to get traded by saying that, but that's the way that works. But for me, Josh Bailey ends up being one of the 15 favorites on this list. Number 14. Honorable mention to Rolly Melanson. I can't have Melanson in top 15, but I did like Rolly Melanson. Rolly the goalie. So number 14. Johnny Boychuk was one of my favorite defensemen in Boston, and when he went to the Islanders, my fandom went with him. And I haven't seen anything from Boychuk in his time with the Islanders to make me think he doesn't belong in the top 15 here. He's been an Islander for quite a while now, and he's been a solid defenseman. I know he's slowed down. I know his overall numbers right now are nowhere near where they were. You can look at his contract right now and say, he's probably not worth it at this stage, but I still like Johnny Boychuk, and he is still one of my favorite players that's played for the New York Islanders. So Boychuk gets into 14th. 13th. One thing about these Islanders, they were tough and they could score. Yeah, I'm going to have this guy at 13. I'm trying to figure out a way to have Anders Lee higher. I know he's the current team captain. I know it was great too last summer, a year after they'd lost Tavares, that they don't end up losing Lee. That was very key for this franchise, just for the look of the franchise. You can't lose your captain 2 years in a row. I think that would have been hard for the team, for the franchise, and definitely for the fans. But there's so many guys from that dynasty that are on this list, from that 80s dynasty that I watched, that Lee ends up being 13th on the overall list. So it speaks more to the strength of the top 12 than to any weakness in having Lee at 13th. Number 12. John Tonelli. So we're into the first member of that dynasty, John Tonelli. And good, solid forward. And there were so many good, solid players on this team that Tonelli it's kind of easy to lose him in the shuffle, right? Because he had a team with Clark Gillies and Nystrom and Bossy and Trottier. And so Tonelli, it would be honestly understandable to go, all right, yeah, Tonelli Forgot about that part of the dynasty. They were pretty darn good. Number 11, my overall favorites list. Also from the dynasty, big part of how it got started, Butch Goring. And Butch Goring has to be top 15 for his helmet alone, right? You have to have Butch Goring in the top 15 at least for that. But you want key goals. You want a guy who can play at both ends of the rink. A very solid forward, a smart player. Very, very popular with his teammates and with fans. And so Butch Goring gets up there for me at number 11, which means the top 10 is pretty strong. So yeah, Goring. And then I decided to pick one of the Sutters. And I went with Brent. Brent Sutter, between Dwayne and Brent. Brent was the one that scored more goals, more prominent player. Just an excellent all-around forward. And your prototypical Sutter. He could fight if he needed to. He could score goals here and there and scored some points. Offensively, between he and Bryan, Bryan was probably the better offensive forward. It's a tough call. And yet, Brent, again, was one of those guys you might be able to lose in the shuffle. Might have watched too much of the 100 over the last few days. Shuttles and all that stuff in my head. And then reading my book, too, on the entertainment guy, that's probably not helping. So I'm sorry for the times I say shuttle instead of shuffle. I apologize. Number 9. Bob Nystrom you could put on this list for his mustache. Bob Nystrom you could put on this list for the fact that he was tough and he could score. And he was another one of those guys. And honorable mention to Wayne Merrick. Wayne Merrick, another player for that team that was pretty darn good. And Bob Nystrom, pretty darn good. There was a lot of good on that team and some excellence. And you don't win 19 series in a row without some pretty solid players. And Nystrom definitely being one of those solid players. I do wonder, like, all those playoff series, how many years did that take off some guys' careers? Because that's a lot of hockey. Number 8. So we're going to go to Miracle on Ice here. And Ken Morrow. Ken Morrow, defensive defenseman. And Ken Morrow, for me, he's that prototypical defensive defenseman that I liked quite a bit. And you will see defensive defensemen on my favorites lists often. And yeah, again, he was part of that Miracle on Ice. And just an excellent all-around defenseman for a team that had no shortage of excellent all-around defensemen there. Number 7. So not part of the dynasty years, and Zygmunt Palffy and his trade out of New York was one of the infamous things done by Mike Milbury. Even though he was told to slash the budget's being slashed, you got to get rid of some guys, and Palffy had to go for the amount of money he made. Palffy's one of those, when I get to on the low points of each franchise for the Islanders, yeah, Palffy to me is that lost asset. He's that player who could have been excellent for the Islanders for a long time, and then he ends up being traded to the Kings. And Palffy, he was an electrifying player, and it kind of came out of nowhere that he was certainly talked about before he came over, but once he got here and we saw how special he was, you just have to look at Palffy and think what could have been, what might have been if he had stayed with the Islanders. If the Islanders hadn't been trading all these guys out when they wanted actual money, what might have happened? Maybe we wouldn't be looking at a team that's had a franchise history that's been spotted since, I'll say, the late 80s. Next up, I'll put at 6, Billy Smith. Billy Smith, now I'm going to say this right out. When I was a little kid, I hated Billy Smith. I couldn't stand him because every time you went near his net, he'd slash you in the back of the leg. Not me personally. Not like, kids go out and it's, family day out on the ice and Billy's still out there protecting the crease. He was pretty intense, but there was a limit. But just Billy Smith had this feud with Tiger Williams. And as a Tiger Williams / Canucks fan, I was siding, of course, with Tiger for that, even though Tiger kind of initiated and kind of egged the whole thing on. But, over the years, I've really had a respect for what Billy Smith was able to do and for the fear he put in players that went near his net. That can't be overstated, that it's important as a goaltender. Make sure guys respect that if they come near your net, they might get their head taken off. They'll give you space. And I think we see that even in today's game, where if a goaltender's a little bit tougher, and, guys may give a little bit more space to that goaltender. So Billy Smith was definitely the best at that. Number 5. Clark Gillies. Clark Gillies, again, tough, could score, did a little bit of everything, and he looked tough out on the ice. He definitely looked like the kind of guy you'd back into and turn around and go, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Gillies. I seem to be on your ice. I'll just go ahead and leave the ice here. I'm going to go sit on the bench now." Yeah, and again, those Islanders, they could play every style of game. They could beat you with a 7-5 score. They could beat you 2-0 with Billy Smith in net. Or if you wanted to drop the gloves, fine, gotcha. So when we were coming out of the Broad Street Bullies era for Philadelphia, these guys were still playing. They could play that game if they needed to. And Clark Gillies was one of the toughest players in the NHL. So number 5 goes to him. Number 4, as the era of the dynasty ended, Pat LaFontaine was coming in for the Islanders. And I remember thinking, this isn't fair. They've had a dynasty now for 4 years. They just lost a Stanley Cup final. And now this Pat LaFontaine kid's coming in, and he looks amazing. And LaFontaine really kind of sort of was amazing. And it was always surprising to me. I'm still kind of surprised he didn't just stay in New York. I'm surprised that the trade for him to Buffalo was odd at the time. And yet, the Islanders were trying to shake things up. And Pat LaFontaine was part of what they were shaking up. And that's too bad. And I say that as somebody who was more cheering for Buffalo at the time than for the Islanders. But, Pat LaFontaine, he's one of those guys that if he played today, probably would have played his entire career in one city. And in this case, it would have been the New York Islanders, who ironically haven't played in just one city over the last few years. So he would have played multiple cities, but he would have stayed an Islander. Number 3. Bryan Trottier. The thing that I liked with Bryan Trottier the most was that when his offense started to go south, his game didn't. So the scoring was fantastic at his peak. Absolutely fantastic points and goals from Trottier. However, when that scoring fell off, he was still the leader, and he was still doing everything on the ice defensively that you wanted. And he reinvented himself, and then he goes to Pittsburgh, and he wins a couple more championships. So Bryan Trottier was a winner wherever he went. And, that's kind of his legacy as a player. As a coach, things went a little bit different. But as a player, Bryan Trottier a winner. And, again, the Islanders could kind of beat you on every level. Number 2. So when you compare defensemen now that are coming into the league, and you compare them to all-time greats, you can compare them to Coffey offensively. You can compare them to Bobby Orr if you want them to look bad. And you can compare them to Denis Potvin if you're talking about the all-time best when it comes to the all-around game, where he could do kind of sort of everything. So recently, Rasmus Dahlin selected by the Buffalo Sabres, and the Denis Potvin comparisons were there right away. And I thought that was unfair to Dahlin, but it pointed out just how excellent of a prospect Denis Potvin was that turned into arguably the best defenseman that when we look back through history at defenseman, it might be easier to lose Denis Potvin in the mix. He scores 1,000 points. He plays for the New York Islanders his whole career. And he retired before other players might have. And he really honestly was an excellent New York Islander throughout his career, and he knew when to walk away. So I have the utmost respect for Potvin. Again, during the 80s, I was not cheering for the Islanders. But yeah, I have to say they had an excellent team. And number 1 on the list is not Rick DiPietro. So before people ask, it's not Rick DiPietro. It's not Alexei Yashin either. It's neither of their contracts either. Mike Bossy's number 1. When we talk about great goal scorers, we talk about Ovechkin right now. We talk about Lemieux. We talk about Gretzky. Mike Bossy, though, it's too bad that his career was cut short. Because if he'd remained healthy, I am convinced to this day Bossy scores 900 goals in the NHL. I'm convinced that Mike Bossy would have been the all-time leader in goals. Again, if Mario Lemieux had been healthy his entire career, it's highly likely Lemieux would have had 900 goals. But Mike Bossy, for my money, probably 900 goals. He was absolutely electrifying out there, and yes, it was at a time where a lot of goals were being scored, but Bossy he made it look easier than others. And he seemed like a really good team guy, and while there were other guys on this list that teams would, get kind of mad at and angry with and fans might complain about, I never saw that with Bossy. I never saw fans complaining about Mike Bossy, and I mean for other teams. So at a time where the Islanders were champions, it always felt like Bossy had that level of respect from both his teammates and from the opposition that might separate him from the rest. And again, probably one of the greatest goal scorers I've ever seen. And I did a video on greatest goal scorers ever, and Bossy was near the tops of that list. And if we were, dealing with a guy who'd played his entire career without the injuries that shortened it, who knows, right? Anyways, there you go. There's my list of 15 favorite all-time New York Islanders. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. It means a ton. And again, remember to stay home if you're able to. If you're not, stay safe. Stay safe while you're at home as well by washing your hands frequently. It works. And hey, thank you guys so much for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.